Today, Jinhua Zhao from MIT will talk us about emotional travel and the role of social psychology in shaping mobility decisions. So, Jinhua, the time is yours. We have a Q&A pod in the right side, so anything that you want to ask, please do it on that pod. And that's all. The time is yours, Jinhua.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. And good morning or afternoon or evening, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join this seminar. Uh, Today, instead of presenting a specific project, I will mostly try to introduce a perspective. I titled it as emotional travel, but using the term emotion in a broader sense, try to argue there's a richer set of factors that influence people's mobility decision. So let me start with what I my interest is mostly to how to change behavior, and particularly this type of behavior. Hopefully you can see this on the screen. But I present this kind of for fun, but also try to make the point that people making decisions uh, in many occasions that's beyond just travel time and travel cost consideration. In the psychology, there's a classic distinction between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. I think in transportation field, our models, our theories are mostly focused on the conscious part of the brain, while we now more and more recognize that many decisions, many behaviors are actually driven by the subconscious part of the mind. Uh, so here there's the constant debate between the Homo econ argument versus the Homo sapien. Homo econ try to have assumptions of human behavior where people are fully rational. We have infinite computational power. We have access to all the information, and we execute our decision very well. But Homo sapien try to say that we are just human beings. We are not all the time rational. We have a limited computational power. We have limited access to information. And so here there's a set of deviations, like a loss aversion, overweighting small probability, etc., that we already identified that's different from the rational economic assumption. So my own research interest is try to bring the behavior science and transportation engineering together to enrich the discussion of mobility, both in terms of the behavior understanding point of view, but also from the policy design point of view. Specifically today, I want to talk about three topics, and with these three questions: is travel social, is travel emotional, and is travel time absolute? Why do we bother this? I mean, what does this mean? I'll try to argue that the answer to these three questions actually relevant to many of the things that we're discussing today, like on-demand service, shared mobility, even autonomous vehicle, etc. So let me start with the first one. Is travel social here? Let me start with the question: why ants don't run into traffic jam while people do? That's one of the chapter by a book, Traffic. They don't have a traffic signal. They don't have intelligent transportation system. They don't even have a Google Map. But deep in their genetic design, they have the mentality of cooperation. So that's one sense of why how travel is social. There are other aspects you can discuss. For example, the distinction between intrinsic versus extrinsic motivations, about the social norm and the peer pressure, but also looking at transportation as a social space where people mingle while traveling. So let me talk a little bit about the last point here, using an example of shared mobility, which popularized by Uber Pool or Lyft Line. So for that, in the shared mobility area, there come two challenges. The first one is physics. You have two trips with similar origin, similar destination, close enough travel time window, and you can put them together. And there are already research from MIT Sensible City Lab by Paulo Santi. Uh, uh, Despite the complexity, this is a definable a mathematical problem, and we already have solution for that. But there are a second challenge. which is the psychology of a shared ride. If you look at all these algorithms used by Uber Pool or Lyft Line, if you apply them to two persons to pool or two boxes to pool, you'll find they apply equally well. You can see this as the brilliance of mathematics, but also as a planner, which I am, you cannot help wondering there must be something missing here. So uh, let me introduce the concept of social interaction. Put in the extremely simple fashion, there are two types of interactions. One is the meeting room type of interaction, where you arrange it beforehand, you know each other, you're very well prepared, you have an intense discussion. While the other type is the bathroom encountering, where you bump into each other. So here, the spontaneity is so important that this is kind of an episode that Steve Jobs, when they designed the new Apple headquarters, he insisted to work with Norman Foster, the architect, to co-design the Apple campus with a specific request about the location of the bathroom. Here, he argues that that's where the serendipitous encounters happen. If you look at the shared mobility context, you will find this meeting room interaction and the bathroom interaction, the shared ride actually combine the two in a very unique way, which is that the two people will be paired quasi randomly. That's the impromptuness part. But once you are paired, you're stuck with each other for 15, 20 minutes, and you can talk a lot in 15, 20 minutes. So here, share ride is a unique combination setting for this combination. And furthermore, it's very different from trains and buses. Despite being public, they do not encourage social interaction. People read papers or pretend to read. People look down, avoid eye contact. Here, in the backseat of the car, though, that's where kids are brought up. That's where family talk to each other. You have a sense of coziness and even intimacy here. So shared ride has the combination of impromptuness, intensity, and intimacy, which I argue that is a unique form of social interaction that we never really seen before at scale. All right. So here, with this setting, there are different questions you can ask. So the first one is, how do we generalize the algorithm that not only consider the natural efficiency, but also to respect people's preference or social interaction? Second question, so here, let me illustrate a little bit. This is done by Homo Zhao, my postdoc, doctoral student. We're working together on this. Try to say that there are different trade-offs you can make. This graph shows that the average ranking of so if you assume there's a random order of preference of people, and with a different matching algorithm, you can reduce the average paired person's ranking significantly. So in other words, you improve the social interaction quality there. By doing that, of course, you pay a price, which is you incur a little bit longer travel time. So that shows the distribution of the additional travel time if you pair with the triple bus, you go by yourself. What's the additional travel time? And you find that if you were to match with a person that you like to interact with, the travel time may be longer. So for today's discussion, I will keep it simple, just to give you the bulk part of the discussion here. So you will find that there are three different objective functions you can use. So one is to minimize the vehicle trips, so to match as many trips as possible. The second one is to minimize travel time, total VKT. And the third one is to maximize the stable preference matching, so that you get a good interaction. So look across the three. The general picture here is stable preference matching, which respect people's preference for social interaction, you incur a little bit price in terms of the VMT, but not a lot more. So the average time saved per trip differ between 3.3 minutes versus 1.15 minutes here. So put it really simply, so if by incurring 100 extra seconds for a better conversation, would you do it? Of course, not all the people would do it, but some people may choose. That's a variation in terms of the taste here. All right, that's the first question. That's more of the matching algorithm that brings the network efficiency and the social preference together. But the second question is more difficult. We said we want to respect people's preference for social interaction, but not all the preferences are necessarily respectable. So you can imagine that social prejudice, racial biases can exhibit itself in the shared writing setting here. So there's another question which is important. How do we draw the line between the preference worthy of respect versus the preference that society as a whole reject? There are several examples. For example, in many of the developing countries, there are certain shared right situation where if you're female, you can request you only be paired with another passenger which is female, who is female. So that's a gender preference, and in that context, it's a respectable preferences. But you can imagine certain things we may not want to respect, and as the platform design, we may reject a certain notion on that. Yeah. So that's the second question. I wouldn't expand on this for now. Then the third one is about autonomous vehicle, where there will be no supervision of the driver. Two strangers will be paired in the car without the driver defining the general norm of the interaction here. So that's another interesting area to look at. So basically, that's the kind of first example I want to illustrate to say that to look at travel from a social perspective is actually very interesting. And the new technology are bringing new modes of mobility, new forms of potential human interaction, and that's a rich area to be explored. Okay, so that's the first example. The second example is about, is travel emotional? That's kind of exactly to the point of the title I give. For that, let me give some settings from some example from China. If you have been to China, you wouldn't be surprised to see this picture in Beijing. That's in 2010. But less of you may be familiar with Beijing in 1980. So what you can see from this picture, basically, they are the buses and bicycles. Within 30 years, Beijing completely transformed itself from a largely bicycle public transit-based system to a mostly motorized car-based system. So here, there are many stories you can tell based on these two pictures, but let me drive your attention to bicycle. This picture shows the bicycle mode share in Beijing. To be precise, this share doesn't consider walking, so non-walking bicycle mode share. It dropped from 60% down to 16% and even lower today. That's a dramatic change of bicycle, and it's, if you look at sustainable transportation, all these good things we say about low carbon travel, green travel, etc. This is really a sad situation to see bicycle drop in such a degree. But here, if you look at, also this picture shows the peak of the bicycle in China, where China was called the kingdom of bicycle. It's really massive everywhere. But if you look at what drives the decline, the many things you can talk about, the building environment, income growth, policy regulation, bicycle industry, all those different factors lead to the bicycle decline. Those, many of these are objective factors, but today I just want to emphasize that there's also the emotional, attitudinal factor that lead to this. Showing here is the picture of a now infamous lady in the TV show says the following: I would rather cry in a BMW than smile on a bike. I mean, she may put it too extremely, but that actually indeed represents quite a bit of the social mentality there. Bicycle is seen as a fate of life, seen perceived as only for the migrant, for the delivered person, for the poor student, etc. So here, there's quite a bit of emotional attachment to the transportation mode here. Just more interestingly, if you look at the history 100 years ago, when bicycle was imported to China at the beginning, it was actually seen as a symbol for modernity. It's used by urban elite, represent luxury, being open, being modern, and even used as a symbol for women liberation here. Yeah. So if you look at the whole historical cycle of bicycle, from the modernity to be a failure to later, hopefully, I mean, like in very many of the European cities, bicycle now more and more represent the active lifestyle. You could be a cool person by bicycling. All right. So those are the kind of the historical cycle of different bicycle. At the beginning, it's more of an upper class fancy. Then in the 1949 to 78, that's a period where upper middle class all try to have it. And the next phase becomes it's a rapid growth phase. So it becomes a family necessity. Every person have one, and then have a rapid decline that we discussed. And hopefully that we'll see sometimes later for revival of bicycle. But it's interesting, this cycle also match with the cars cycle in a similar pattern, except it's offset by half a century or so. So cars in China 15 years ago is matches with this early adoption period with this upper class fancy. And nowadays, cars in China is mostly about the upper middle class go. And then cars in North America probably is average family necessity here. So when can we look for another the period where we can revive the bicycle, looking at it as active lifestyle, the pro-environment, and even being a cool person there? All right, so that's kind of the one example from China. I just illustrate that beyond travel time, travel cost, income, land use, etc., there are also very powerful emotional force that also influence people's mobility decision. Give you another example in London. I interned in Linde in 2006 and 2007. I noticed this quote in the 80s, misattributed to Lady Margaret Thatcher. But anyway, she said, a man who beyond the age of 26 finds himself on the bus can count himself a failure. So you couldn't be more emotional than this. Yeah. So here, but then when I was there in 2006, 2007, that's like 20, 30 years later, you'll find things could change. You observe that people traveling on the bus, on the train, rich and poor, old or young, without worrying that their social image being distant. So here, the general point is this. Here, the emotional consideration or social consideration is powerful. That's point one. But point two, you could, as a society, shift that in the 20 or 30-year time span. So we talk about bicycle, talk about bus, and in the car industry, that's well recognized. This is Lord Roos, is a car advertiser. So no other man-made device since the shield and lens of Asian knights fulfills a man's ego like automobile. So there's, I think most people have an intuition that those emotions, those social aspects, those attitudes matters. Yeah. So here we have one paper with Zhao, is also a doctoral student at MIT. We're working on the paper on car pride, psychological structure, and behavior implication. Try to give a more theoretical underpinning of this concept and introduce some empirics for it. But for now, I just give you some kind of quick idea here. The first one is a simple stats. We collected some data in Shanghai, 1,000 sample of Shanghai residents. We asked the question, I would own a car even if I don't need to travel. Half of people said yes. That really surprised even me because half of people are literally saying that they're buying a car not necessarily for the purpose of mobility here. Then if you ask people for, if I feel proud of owning a car, you'll find an overwhelming majority will say yes, agree, or strongly agree with it. So here, this shows the kind of the psychological structure of the formation of car pride. So you have to have start with an idea of having a car, and then ask self, does it symbolize? If having a car doesn't symbolize, then for you it goes to no. Then for you there's no self-representation. Then you're neutral by car. But if you think car does symbolize, then you ask second question, which is this symbolization relevant to your identity or not? Yeah. Then if you said no, also you get to neutral. But if yes, you go to another layer, which then you ask a question, is having a car congruent or consistent with your own identity goal here? So if yes, then you have a positive self-representation, meaning owning a car, the idea of owning a car is consistent with your own, your self-perception, and you have a positive representation, then you think you feel car pride. And then there's also another possibility, which is having a car is against your self-identity. In that case, you may experience car shame. I work at MIT, and at MIT, you do see a lot of people may experience car shame. For example, myself, I mean, I teach a class, I lecture my students to sustainable transportation, try to avoid car, use public transit, etc. But once you ask me, do you have a car? I say, yes, I do. But often I add to it, oh, I have a Prius plug-in. So why do I feel the obligation to add the second half of the sentence? I think that's because to some degree I have the car shame. I try to explain myself. So okay, so that's some general structure. Then you can collect data using certain psychometric measurement. Then you can use factor analysis, try to digest into the car pride. Um, I think I link it to different things. For example, in one part is you measure car price through this car price indicator. But the other side, you can use socioeconomics variables to explain the variation in car price, or to what degree you can explain it. And then finally, you can, once the car price defined, you can look at the correlation and the influences on car ownership and the car usage. So let me report to you the basic finding here. First of all, those car pride indicators indeed can capture quite a bit of the essence of car pride. The indicators are consistent with each other. But if you look at the socioeconomic status here, they do not explain car pride very well. The R square of the car pride is like 7 to 15%, depending on how you cut the data, etc. But what it says is there's a limited capacity for the socioeconomic variables to approximate the car pride. In other words, in order to study car pride, you really have to have an independent measurement of this concept. That's the first one. The second one is the connection between car pride and car ownership and car usage. First of all, let me be upfront. Overall, this study does not talk about the causality. We only look at the correlation between car pride as concept and car ownership and usage as a behavior. The finding is the following. For me, I had the intuition before the collect that I know that car pride somehow must influence ownership or car usage, etc. But I thought car pride will only play somehow in the margin, like you have a very tiny bit of influence, but the main thing should still be dictated by the travel time, travel cost, the land use structure, the income, etc. But the result shows a very significant finding. The connection between car price and every aspect of the car ownership and usage is significant. So including, do you own a car or not? When do you start to own a car? What price car you buy? What type of car you buy? So those things kind of, again, along with the intuition, high pride makes people owning more car, to own a car early, buy more expensive car, buy more luxury car. But then also the car license type is a special thing I need to explain a little bit. Shanghai introduced a very aggressive car ownership control policy, which is each month they set up a limited quota of license. And in order to drive your car, you have to join the auction, bid for the quota. For now, the ongoing auction average price is about 15,000 US dollars. So you have to pay the government $15,000 to get the license. So that's the policy. But certain Shanghai residents, they're smart. They go out of Shanghai, go to another nearby city, rent a car there, and drive back to Shanghai, pretend to be a non-local vehicle. So I'm a tourist or business to bypass the auction. That itself is a big topic. I won't get into it. But the point I try to make here is when you have a higher pride, you tend to buy the local Shanghai license rather than the non-local one. That's interesting because for the plate to show a Shanghai license plate is something additional to owning a brilliant, beautiful car. There's another thing, another way to express your pride of owning a car. Then on the so that's the ownership part. On the usage part, also you find a high pride associated with using car as a primary commuting mode, high usage frequency, high VKT, and a high share of car trips. All right, so if you're interested in the specific number, the equation, etc., we'll send you the paper. We can read it. But for this today's topic, I just want to give you the general picture here. All right. So here you can ask a broader question. So is travel just a mundane daily chore, or does it have a higher meaning attached to it? Here, if you observe your own life, if you look at food, clothing, sheltering, traveling, all aspects of your personal life, you'll find actually all of them have an element of utility and an element of vanity in this. It's just the vanity part has not been very well understood and really incorporated into the transportation study here. All right, so then let me link it to the autonomous vehicle discussion, which has been kind of very popular these days. One thing the high pride could influence is that car pride exhausts private ownership. Uh, that's the point of being exclusive, and you enjoy the social kind of status expression. But here, if we agree that autonomous vehicle, a good way of deploying autonomous vehicle is in this more shared mode of autonomous vehicle rather than the ownership mode of autonomous vehicle, a high pride may hold back to some degree of this shared mode of AV development. A broader impact on policy is also about the pricing as an instrument to change behavior. Congestion charging, toll road, all sort of pricing-based transportation policies is very critical. But here we find high pride reduce people's price elasticity, meaning for the same kind of a price change, people are less sensitive to it. So undermining partially the impact of a congestion charging. And the second point, more interestingly, is the car restriction policy may actually perversely increase the car pride for the following reason, because car restriction policy makes the car more exclusive, while pride feeds on exclusivity. The more exclusive the car is, the more pride people obtain by having one. So there's another important lesson we should pay attention to. All right. So that's the second module on the is travel emotional. Let me get to the third one. The time, yeah, the time is fine. So let me go. So it's about the travel time. Is travel time absolute? Here, in Newtonian physics, time is linear, one-dimensional, and absolute. Right? And in transportation, we see travel time is wasted, of negative utility, and to be reduced. Right? So I learned transportation mostly as a transportation engineer. I bought into this view for a long time until I saw this picture. This is by Dali, surrealism painter. The the painter really tried to reject the notion of rigidity of time. So here, if you look at how to really interpret travel time, there's artist's view of Dali, there's Einstein's view of time dilation. Interesting, Dali and Einstein are actually contemporaries of each other. Then, of course, there's the psychologist's view of travel time, which argues that everybody have a biological clock in your brain, using that to judge or measure the duration of travel time. And in transportation, mostly by Professor Pat Mokhtarian, talk about the utility of travel that include both the utility at the destination, but also utility of traveling per se, and as well as the multitasking. So that's an important way of broadening our view of travel time. Here, let me just argue try to emphasize the point of the difference between reality and perception. So in this graph, it shows a broader sense of the theory of behavior choice, which argues that people's choice is a result of a process that takes perception and preference as two inputs here. While the perception is a function of reality, but mediate through information. So here, the key point I try to look at is the information could be used to manipulate people's perception here. So here, let me give you an example. This is in Linde's underground map, and you can look at how much distortion the map has vis-a-vis the reality here. So these are two maps of the maps and the real one. And if you can zoom into it, look at these particular two. They're showing the same four station between Paddington and Bond Street. If you look at the map, you would happily go either of two ways. You can go down and then take the red line, or you go right or take to the green, which the Jubilee line. But if in reality, from Paddington to Bond Street, it totally doesn't make sense for you to go through Paddington to Notting Hill and Bond Street. But if people's decision made through the map, then you may get a very different behavior response. So for that, later we'll talk about Professor Zhang Guo has from NYU have a very good paper on this. Let me just quote some of his paper results and show you the general insight. One, you would think that despite the distortion of map over reality, the two better be highly correlated. So this is the correlation between the distance in the reality versus the distance between two stations in the map. The correlation coefficient is 0.22, so only 4% of variation can be explained by the map. So it's stunningly, the distortion is really significant here. So I mentioned Zhang Guo's paper about the mind map that many of you may be aware of, really to demonstrate the power of information in influencing troll behavior. Later, Jan and me, we worked together to try to use map as an active planning tool. So here, let me show you some of the quick results. The first one is in Jan's paper on the route choice model. So you're showing that between Paddington and Holborn, you have very different ways to travel. But here, we'll try to use that to illustrate the impact of map. So in this model, just zoom into this, you'll find this is a route choice model. Clearly, in-vehicle travel time matter. But after controlling for all those other things, the map attributes also matter. For example, map distance is significantly negative at the number of stations. So the map has additional impact on people's choice of route choice beyond the actual in-vehicle travel time. Then you can change into the elasticity term. You'll find actually the map distance is people are more sensitive to the map distance than the actual in-vehicle travel time, the ratio being 2.1. And that's true. This is for the population as a whole. If you differentiate between the first-time passenger and a frequent passenger, you would think about if you're a frequent user, you'd be more familiar with the reality. Therefore, the map distance impact will be reduced, which is true in this case. The ratio between the two reduced from 2.1, reduced from the let's see, 2.1 to 1.69. But despite the reduction, even for the frequent passenger, they still cannot help being influenced by map. The map distance still very strongly significant. All right. So the second piece on the information is try to use maps or information as an active tool to change behavior. For that, Jana, we collaborated. We look at the Washington D.C. metro system. There are two different ways to cross the river. You can take the blue line or take the yellow line. The blue line is very congested, highly crowded. The system. So as a transportation engineer or planner, you think about what's the way to move people to reduce the crowding here, or shift the people from blue to yellow line. I mean, you can think about different things. You can add frequency, but of course, the system is reaching the limit of how many trains you can add to it, or you can try to have a differential pricing, which has a lot of problems. One is will people accept that? Does it make sense politically and active point of view? But also just in terms of the implementation, it's not trivial. People are in the same system. How do you differentiate them by charging them differently? So here we are trying to use, can we use the information as a tool? So this is based on a stated preference survey that we basically give people different maps. And given a particular origin destination, let people choose, would they choose the blue line or the yellow line? So let me give you some quick examples. So if you look at these two, what we did is basically artificially extend lengthen the blue line to the left. Yeah, and with this change, we do find 5.6% of people shift with this particular angle. When you enlarge the left, more people are shifting to the yellow line. I know you can play with the different ways. You can change it up front. You can do both. We tried all sorts of things, but the general picture here is maps could have the potential to change behavior by giving people different information here. But of course, this is based on stated preference survey. I mean, we haven't implemented this. We don't know in reality what would play out. So you can look at the different design, how much this will change behavior. But if you look at this this is the different maps, you'll find for most of the manipulation of the map, the change of the ratio is significant. Lastly, I just mentioned that Lance Wyman is the designer of the natural map. So we invite him as a co-author. He helped a lot with the paper understanding of the map design. But he in the end, he only agreed to enlarge the ratio between blue and the yellow line by 4 percentage points. Maybe for a good reason, because as a professional map designer, there's a kind of a ethic that he wants to follow. He basically tried to say that this type of manipulation is cheating. We are not presenting the fact here. Yeah. But for that, I mean, the line, what is the acceptable manipulation, what is not, I think it's not a trivial question. There's no clear-cut answer to that. But I just let you know that Lance, for the moment, only accepted 4% change rather than go as crazy as we suggested. All right. So what is that says is information affects behavior, and also you can manipulate information to influence behavior, and very much depending on how people perceive the reality here. Only last thing to add is about travel time used in AV. Professor Liang and Uri in 2005 plotted a kind of a hypothetical distribution of quality of time usage during travel. Try to argue that if some people may have, there will be a distribution. Some people may feel like it's counterproductive working on the train or bus. Some people may feel like it's productive. Some people may even feel like it's ultra productive. You can get some genius ideas while traveling on the train, but mostly you follow certain distribution. And the question about autonomous vehicle is empirically, how would an autonomous vehicle then overlay this in this distribution? And I think that's an open question to study. All right, so I think that's mostly the general content. I give you 3 examples. Is travel social? Is travel emotional? Is travel time absolute? As some teaser to open the general question, the topic. Maybe I mean, yeah, I think we have some time. Maybe let me spend a few minutes to talk about to answer those questions. Those are very interesting questions. We need a lot of methodological innovation here. So particularly, how do you get to this subconscious part of the mind? Here I've listed a couple of things. In the top left corner, the questionnaire survey, you can ask people directly or doing conjoint analysis, data preference survey, etc. Those are the kind of a classic way of doing things. But there are also emerging new technology that we can use. For example, you can observe people's pupil and how dilated it is to reflect how much attention it's paying. You can use this EEG neural headset machine to do things. And in the bottom left, we have this is the social psychological method called implicit association test. And then lastly, you can use, of course, this functional MRI to really look into the brain activity. So here, I just want to give people a sense that there are emerging technology we could use. Myself has been experimenting in the questionnaire, the EEG neural headset, and the IET test. I haven't been able to use the fMRI for 2 reasons. One is they're just too expensive, the multi-million-dollar machine I couldn't afford. Secondly, to use the machine, you really had to put people into the tunnels, like to lie down there. So it's very hard to do mobility study in this setting. There needs some innovation to do that. All right, so let me skip some of the specific technical part, but get down to some closing remark here. So I started with these 3 questions, and I argue that they are not just for fun, that of the curiosity of a scholar, but they actually matters for many of the transportation discussion, like the on-demand service, shared mobility, autonomous vehicle, etc. And then with this understanding of emotional travel, we may improve or change the way we sense behavior, we understand behavior, but also the way we nudge behavior to actively change behavior or regulating behavior. So lastly, I will leave you guys with this. This is the triune structure of the brain by Dr. McLean. This is extremely simplified view of the brain. I mean, if you're a serious neuroscientist, you will, laugh at this. But I think it's useful as a general structure. You talk about the three structure, the three layers: the neocortex, the limbic system, and the reptilian system. In the simplest way to put it, their function is the reptilian system is survival, and the limbic system is emotion, and neocortex system is rationality. So here, the general understanding of this, the deeper you can get into the brain structure, the more likely you
Jinhua,
can
thank you very much for your presentation.
all right, thank you everybody. So I will pause here for
now we have some time for questions. So if anyone wants to ask, please do it on the chat or the Q&A pod. Also, if anyone wants to share further questions, you can contact Jinhua directly and then have your answers. So I think